Thanks for joining us at the Vegetable Chat. This is a webinar series Purdue Vegetable team recently put together, and we designed these webinars to serve commercial vegetable growers in Indiana and the nearby state. We hope this information could help commercial vegetable growers address their challenges. We also hope to bring new perspective and expand knowledge of the crops that are not currently widely grown in our region. And our first session today is about broccoli. If you're familiar with broccoli, you probably have run into Dr. Thomas Björkman and his work over the years. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Thomas join us today and teach us about broccoli. So Thomas put it on the notes. If you have questions, feel free to put them on the chat box. And if depend on the content, we could stop to answer the questions. Otherwise, it will be at the end, right, Dr. Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay, so with that said, I will pass this to you.
All right, very good. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I really like the chance to talk a little bit about broccoli and the challenges and benefits of growing it. So I'm an emeritus professor at Cornell University, and I was head of the Eastern Broccoli Project, which was an enormous project that had the goal of making broccoli a year-round crop on the East Coast, where a lot of broccoli eaters live. And we were successful in increasing that from a seasonal production of about 40 million a year to currently its year-round production up and down the East Coast, and it's coming in somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 million a year, so quite a lot bigger. So it worked. That was great. Can we do it in the Midwest? Who knows? Let's find out. I will start off talking about a little bit about the opportunity and kind of what we were looking at trying to do with the Eastern Broccoli Project. So one thing that you see is from back around 1970, when some of us were just learning to eat broccoli, it wasn't a very common thing in the United States. Now it's a very common thing. This curve continued to go up until about COVID and then leveled off at that point. But people want to eat more broccoli. There are more broccoli eaters and they're eating more. And so if you're trying to sell something, selling stuff people want to buy makes it a lot easier. And we have a recent trend. So this is just looking at the annual supply. So this is production, but that is fortunately very closely matched with consumption. So California and Arizona are the big producers of basically summer in the Salinas Valley, winter in the desert. We've had an increasing share coming from Mexico, primarily Guanajuato, which feeds directly into the Midwest and Eastern markets. As you can see, California's total production has actually been shrinking the last almost 10 years now. Part of that is due to limitations of land. There just isn't that much land to expand broccoli into if they wanted to grow more. There's competition from other crops, and there is a very big constraint on water at this point. Labor is also something of a challenge. And the Mexican growing region, they have a reasonable amount of water. They have a reasonable supply of labor. And so they've been coming in and taking a larger share. That's important in part because the Mexican supply really sets the low-end price of the wholesale broccoli market. This is what broccoli production in the United States looked at like back in the 2012 census. You can see lots of Salinas Valley, and then the desert in California. There was, at that time, a significant processing, freezing broccoli production in the Willamette Valley. In the East Coast, The big story was up here in the county, as they call it, Aroostook County, Maine, where it is cool in the summertime. Land is cheap. There were a few dots scattered around, and then this concentration of dots down in Florida where they escape frosts and hurricanes and things. Um, they call it, not so helpfully, the Tri-County area. But there was quite a lot of broccoli grown there in the winter time, and that continues to be the base of Eastern production is the far north in the summer and the south here in the winter. But the expansion has really been in the cool part uh, in the higher elevations inland. That's where the opportunity has been. And then here in Western New York, there's quite a bit south of Lake Ontario. The effect of Lake Ontario is really big. So that I'm actually in that part of New York, and the vegetable production across New York, Ontario, Michigan, Wisconsin, even into southern Minnesota is really pretty similar. Um, and so can there be more dots in that part? And why are there no dots here in southern Indiana? There's no dots in Indiana or Ohio or Kentucky at all. What's going on? Why weren't there any? Can we put some there? Good question. Um, so the opportunity that we saw when we started the project that still remains true, locally grown is in demand. They won't pay more for it, but they will choose local over other options if the quality and price are right. The reduced transportation cost is attractive. It is still awfully expensive to bring a load of broccoli and ice from California to the Midwest or the East Coast. There has been a lot of interest in reduced carbon footprint, and I'm pretty sure policy will return to that important goal. And a lot of growers are interested in crop diversification. And because people will always want to eat broccoli, that's a pretty safe crop to choose to diversify into. What are the obstacles? Number one, for the Eastern United States, unsuitable varieties. Broccoli was not bred to grow in this environment. Very much bred to grow in Salinas for the United States. On the East Coast, we had the big gaps in production. There was January and February in Florida, and July through October in Maine, but then two big gaps there. Buyers don't like that. They want to have broccoli on the shelves all the time, and if they don't have to switch producers, they're so much happier. And then we did not really have a distribution network that was functional. Sure, there were trucks, but the people at either end of the truck routes were not talking to each other. So getting the broccoli moved around from the producers to the consumers via the distributors at reasonable cost with reasonable communication just was not happening. That's been a huge change that has really improved in the East. I have no idea what the situation is in the Midwest, but presumably you do. The challenge was that Eastern growers, there weren't enough growers for the seed companies to be interested because they didn't see any customers, so they didn't want to invest. But because we had seed companies, distributors, growers, sort of everybody was involved in the project, that the promise of something happening was enough to get the interest of at least some seed companies. So the Eastern Broccoli Project worked on breeding varieties that have the right traits, and I'll talk a little bit about those. Regional trials to make sure they're widely adapted to the strange conditions that can appear in the East. Getting new varieties out, that's happening right now. Really, the new variety releases have from really Eastern developed stuff that are coming out now. Making sure there's a trained and coordinated grower base, and that's why talks like this are a very welcome opportunity for me. We want to try to optimize the supply. Where are the sweet spots where it's reasonably inexpensive to grow and reasonable prices are available, and also make sure that the retail buyer and is judging the products appropriately. Broccoli can look a lot of different ways, but people are very set about a small number of appearances there. So what do your customers want? I'm starting here because you have to really grow your broccoli for whoever's buying it. There's a lot of different types of consumers and markets, even among supermarkets. They are not all the same. So knowing exactly what your customer wants is going to determine how and even whether you want to raise broccoli. To just go on the spec market and send it to a terminal when you harvest is a pretty good way to lose a lot of money. So I don't recommend that. So the price trend during a lot of the project here, this is looking at terminal market prices for crown cut broccoli, 20-pound boxes at several of the Eastern terminal markets. So the thing with the terminal markets is they are the most volatile price-wise. In particular, New York, that if there's ever any leftover broccoli coming across the country that didn't find a buyer after it left California or Mexico, it ends up in New York. So if there's a little bit of oversupply, boom, the price goes crashing down at the terminal market. But that's all the leftover broccoli. If there's a shortage, the New York buyers have to have broccoli. They will pay ridiculous amounts of money to make sure they have broccoli on their shelves. So you see a lot of fluctuation. There is no way to anticipate it. There's no pattern to it. If you are in a market that's related to the wholesale price, it will bounce around a lot. This is where having a long harvest season like they do in California is helpful, that you can balance these out. If you're only in the market a short time during the year, you don't know which of those peaks or dips that you would be into. And this is looking more closely at the Chicago terminal market. Again, I don't know the dynamics at the Chicago terminal, but it's really quite interesting that you get a sense of what the wholesale prices are. That it's reasonable to hope you get $20 a box is one conclusion. And you can see the dotted Mexico comes in. It comes in right at the bottom edge price-wise. So it is setting the bottom of the market. Nobody else gets to go particularly high when Mexico is in the market. When Mexico is out of the market in the middle of summer of 24, look what happened to prices. Boom, they went really high. So that was a gap. But then there was an oversupply in the winter down in Indiana. Broccoli you wouldn't be selling in February and March. But there you see the depression of prices as you have both the desert and probably Florida is in there a little bit, coming in really low. Interestingly, we have Indiana. So somebody back in October, just a few weeks ago, got a really good deal on their broccoli. So congratulations to you, whoever that was. But that was a shortage spike. It doesn't last long. So if you hit it, great, but don't count on it. And we have quite a lot of Quebec production comes in. So this green line you can see in the summertime. So for Chicago-based supply and demand, Quebec and part of Ontario are definitely part of the picture. So that's sort of prices and what you have to deal with price-wise, but then what does the product look like? So there used to be quite a bit of bunch broccoli, but there really is not anymore. It's almost entirely crown cut, and now it's crown cut and Asian cut. So all three of these fit perfectly fine within the definition of crown cut. But as a grower, you want to sell as much of the plant as you can get away with. And so the one on the left, that's a nice crown cut. I think you would call that a 3-finger, because the stem is about 3 fingers before you cut it. But this one down here is the Asian cut, and a lot of customers really want that. So your yield is going to be much less. The stem is quite dense. You have to know what the customer wants before you pack it. And also choose a variety that will produce something of the right cut. People get picky about whether it looks the same. So here we have 5 heads. It's all the same variety. They were cut from near each other. I've enhanced the color differences just a little bit. But if you put all those in the same box, is your customer going to accept that this is a uniform bunch of broccoli? Most customers will, but not all of them. So you have to know in advance whether you can get away with the larger bead on the far left one, or the more purple color on that. They all need to be more like the 3 in the middle here. Customers do get picky on that. This is what some look like coming out of the field. Again, this is the same variety, different heads that I just harvested. And we had some heat injured ones down in the bottom left and some lumpy ones that are a little over mature. We've got one that's showing a little bit of brown bead. Doesn't look bad from a distance, but if you pick that up in the grocery store, you're going to set it right back down. We've got some super fine bead. So again, your harvesters, whoever's picking this for you in the field, needs to be choosing very precisely which of these heads should go in the box. And then we have definition of a bunch. So we had one store that wanted bunch broccoli down in Kentucky. And their definition was that it had to be 9 inches across for a bunch. So however many heads it took to make 9 inches, that was a bunch to them. Well, some growers figured out that they could grow 9-inch broccoli, and does that count as a bunch? Yes, it does. Met their definition. They were perfectly happy getting bunches of 1s or sometimes 2s. Pretty unusual. You have to ask. If you send a field pack, so these are 2 packages that as they show up in the store, they look pretty different. If your customer is used to getting the one on the left and you send them the one on the right, they're going to wonder what was going on. So again, something as simple as how the heads get placed in the box will matter to different customers. This is from an Amish market. They harvest the whole plant, or practically the whole plant. It's really bizarre. The heads are a foot across. So these were cut either late the night before or early the same morning before coming to the auction. You can see I've lifted the cardboard that was covering them, but these have not been cooled at all. They were just packed into boxes, leaves and all, and brought to the auction house. And they're being auctioned off right as I took this picture. Obviously a very different customer who wants that. And while this is fresh, the post-harvest handling is really preventing the kind of quality somebody might be looking for in locally grown fresh material. So again, another example of somebody's pulling this off. It's an unusual definition of quality, but they know their customers are happy. This is working for them. So knowing what the buyer's handling system is like. So some want waxed boxes. If you're shipping with ice, you pretty much have to have a waxed or plastic box. Some customers really, really want ice because they don't have the ability to control temperature as well as they would need to at their end. Others really want unwaxed cardboard boxes because they can recycle them. It's hugely expensive to get rid of waxed boxes. And they don't want ice anywhere near their cold room because somebody's going to slip and fall and sue them. They don't want any of that. So obviously two very different customers there. And then we've had the reusable plastic containers. And the people who are into that have it part of their system, works great. There have been real issues with sanitation on those coming back. I don't know the current status of that situation, but the reusable seems like a pretty desirable way to go if we can get that to work. Um, so that was the selling part. So now the growing part. Uh, and
Can I stop to ask a
yes,
question? Yeah. You mentioned this three-finger cut, Asian cut. Is that affect the quality of the plants or just the personal preference? What kind of card customer?
it is the personal preference. I think the Asian cut is because in a lot of stir fry cooking, they're basically using the florets and not the stem. And so I see that demand particularly with distributors to the Chinese restaurants.
Mm, okay.
And yeah, I talked to those buyers and it's like, oh, that's the only kind of broccoli there is. It's like, oh, they don't know of anything else. And then you go other places and they, oftentimes the stem tastes really good. So customers do want quite a bit of stem to put in theirs. Um, Again, the buyers differ a lot on what they want, and they may not realize that there's a whole bunch of other options out there. They may think the kind they buy is the only kind there is. So good communication about the details of what it's supposed to look like is going to pay off in working with new customers.
Thanks. Is there any other questions about the market before we move side selection? Yeah. Okay. I did not see specific questions in the chat box. I guess we'll keep
Okay.
going.
All right, great. Yeah, so can you grow broccoli in Indiana? So this is what we were looking at on the for the sort of site selection of what was promising for the East Coast. As I mentioned, we ended up mostly at higher elevations in the Appalachians or close to the Great Lakes or very far north. So if you look at the mean minimum temperature through the year in Salinas, where most of the broccoli is grown, uh, you see that it stays pretty cool there. And so I've put a little red zone up at the top where you have high risk of the high temperature deformation of the broccoli. So it doesn't like nights that are that warm. And once it gets down into the low 40s, you don't have that much growth. So that's when Salinas growers move to the desert. But they basically have April through November to work with. Up in Caribou, Maine, in northern Maine, obviously their winters are quite a lot colder and their season is shorter, but it doesn't get hot in they get cold nights all through their summer. So they have a harvest season um, from July, they're pushing June into October, basically. So that's their window. But if you go to Geneva, New York, where I'm located, we're quite a bit warmer than Caribou, but the same sort of a typical, more continental curve. And uh, it gets too hot in the middle of the summer. So in early season is really tough because it's cold at the beginning of the season. They're growing slowly when you want them to grow fast, and then it's hot when you harvest them and you want it to be cool. So we really have fall and September into late October is the sort of target harvest season um, in our part. And so expanding that into August is really the goal that we had to make it more of a viable, long enough season to make it worthwhile. So what about Indiana? Well, here's the data for Vincennes, Indiana. Um, Boy, up in that red zone. Uh, so middle of summer, very, very high risk of getting heat deformation. So if you just use the criteria that we were using on the East Coast. Really early October is the harvest season, not very much. That would be the low risk of heat injury. So uh, the opportunity, and we found this is typical of the Midwest, even Ohio um, looks pretty much the same as this. Um, and the drop off is pretty steep. Once it starts to get cold, it really gets cold. So it's a pretty short window. So I see that as the primary challenge. Can you be in the market long enough to make it worthwhile and maintain the customer relationships? Um, and to what extent can new varieties make it possible to extend into a September or August harvest as well? But that's a lot of degrees of uh, uh, sort of temperature adaptation that would have to be added. But we'll take a look at some varieties because that was something that was of quite a bit of interest to us. Um, so what we were doing for the Eastern Broccoli Project was trying to improve both public sector germplasm and get the best, most adapted seed company germplasm, get crosses between public and private germplasm to get the improved adaptation. So some seed companies were able to do this with their own germplasm, but we really wanted to try to get some public material in there to make it better. Um, and just to see, this is,
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
There's a question about the location specific ask lake effect of Michigan. Do you know much about that?
Yes, I mean, it does give you a little bit more time in the fall. Um, so that it extends just because the frost comes a little bit later, you can extend a little bit more in the fall. And it does have a tempering effect if you're really close, like just within a few miles. Uh, you get a tempering effect. And so um, like I was showing Geneva, where it's right on the edge of that red zone, um, going next to the lake can help for part of the summer. Um, and one of our larger new growers, um, I think he's about a mile from the lake, is where they're finding a sweet spot for production. Um, the lake effect snows, no, those don't make any difference at all.
Thanks.
So this picture shows that high temperature response. This is what we battle trying to grow things in the continental climate. And this is what it looks like when it's a little worse. What you see is there's some big flower buds and some little flower buds. And what happened here is there was cool enough when those big flower buds got started that they're growing normally or maybe even a little fast. But it was too warm for the meristems of the other flower buds to start developing. So they're way behind. They've been growing more slowly. Because they're growing more slowly, the broccoli wants to grow, so it's pushing out leaves because there's at least they will get bigger. So this looks like a mess. And this is the most popular Salinas variety when we started, grown in Geneva, which is almost unrecognizable as broccoli. Um, so if that's what the this is a fantastic broccoli in Salinas, obviously completely unsuited to our climate. Um, he looked for a whole bunch of different traits in the trials. I'm not going to talk about all of these. The bead uniformity is that low chill requirement is the one that was the hardest to crack. But we also have to have all of these other things in there. And that's where working with the seed company so they know what they can do well with the germplasm they have, which parts they can make up for if they're absent in the public varieties, and which things they can't, which they definitely do not want to be crossing in. So this was kind of in the different eastern states, the different harvest windows. You can see the gaps there. Our goal was to fill those in. so that we had year-round supply. So that's where we're going. Um, and we did trial sites up and down the East Coast, mountains coast, to really get a good feel for that. So skipping to the result. So about 12 years of breeding, what we're looking at here is just the trait of bead uniformity. And we looked at a whole bunch of different varieties, which are across the top in different environments, which are the different rows. And uh, green is good, yellow's not so good, pink is a problem. So don't worry too much about the exact numbers. Um, you can see the color trends. And what we have in the columns labeled before on the left are the varieties that were the reasonable varieties to use when we started the project. Then we had a set of varieties that came out early on in the project or were identified from existing material. And then now is at the end of the project, some material that um, was on the market, and then future uh, get future is things that were coming out. And so North Star marked here was just officially named and released a few months ago from Bayo Seed Company. And it's a hybrid. It's marked here. It's a Bayo parent B16-2 and the Cornell parent B13. That went into that one. So that was the result of one of these public-private crosses. And we didn't have enough seed to do all of the locations. But coming across the top row is where it was planted in cold weather, harvested in cool weather. The second one is planted in the cool, harvested in the warm. This is really a tough situation because they grow slowly during the vegetative period when you want them to be growing fast, and you're harvesting into the summer or into the spring when it's too warm and you're hitting those excessive temperature for good flower development. Then we had 3 environments that were warm to cool, and then 4 environments that were warm to warm, which are really pretty tough. But as you can see, overall, there's a lot more green as you go across from left to right. So things are getting better. We've had significant improvements in bead uniformity. And this is overall quality, which is kind of a catch-all. You can't breed for overall quality. You have to breed for the components. But it's sort of everything that can go wrong. And again, here you see a lot of pink and yellow at the far left where we started, and things have gotten greener and greener as we go across. And these things are on the market. I should point out that there's plenty of green here in the troublesome locations for Eastern Crown. That is absolutely the dominant variety for the last several years. So the released one is called North Star, and it's pretty similar to Eastern Crown actually in the head shape. So good heat tolerance. This is one that I harvested in the heat of summer. So this is when it's really being heat stressed, it still looks good. Has a nice big stem on it, which tastes very good, by the way. But if you can sell some of the stem, it packs a lot of weight in there. And it's structured internally like Eastern Crown, a lot like a cauliflower. If I shaded that white and told you it was a cauliflower, it would probably take you a few seconds to realize that it wasn't. That makes it very dense. It packs on a lot of weight, so that's a nice one. So that's now available commercially from your friendly neighborhood seed distributor. Then I want to talk about growing. So I've used
Um,
uh,
sorry to
yes,
interrupt. There's a
yeah.
question. What do the numbers mean in the color boxes?
So the numbers themselves are the rating on. We had a 1 to 5 scale with very clearly defined what each number meant at each of the locations. So those are the means for each location Uh, so they should, so we used 3.0 was minimum commercial acceptability. So that was one of the benchmarks. And 5 was perfect. Can't imagine it being any better.
Mm, okay. I actually have a question. The North Star, you said the head shed is similar to Eastern Crown.
Yes,
My understanding is the North Star can tolerate better on the heat stress. How
yes.
with the other characters, like the hollow stain, the leaves growing on the head, the other parameters, how it compare
Yeah.
with Eastern Crown?
It looks like it's less susceptible to hollow stem. Um,
Mm,
actually, you can see it makes a big stem. Um, then I'll talk a little bit about hollow, how to manage hollow stem production. Um,
mhm. Okay. So you
but we
think
need,
it's, yeah,
yeah. So it's been in commercial grower trials for 3 years now and has behaved. Um, so that's but now it's going out bigger. We'll see how it does with additional growers uh, in the next few years. Um,
thanks.
yeah, so I think of the actual growing of broccoli as a little like a dragster, if you will. So we'll see if the analogy holds up. I tried to make it work for Indy 500 cars, but just for Indiana, but I think I'm going to stick with dragster. It's tough enough to make that analogy work. Uh, but the thing is, you want to go as fast as you can, get perfect gear shifts, and not blow up the engine. So if you think of raising broccoli that way, uh, you can make better decisions along the line using the various tools that you have. Um, so for the first gear in the greenhouse, you need excellent seed, you need optimal greenhouse conditions, uh, you need to harden them off a little, uh, but then use the smallest transplants that will work in your system. Um, so that's kind of an unusual situation, but the smaller the transplant, the stronger the root system's going to be, the less transplant shock you're going to have, which is that uh, first gear shift, and then it reduces the buttoning risk. Um, so this is a picture at 3 or 4 days. This is what the broccoli should look like. Really, really fast. Every one of them is exactly the same. They're all growing as fast as they can at this point. And then the buttoning, if you haven't seen it before, that's when they decide to make a head way too early. This is Castle Dome, a super early variety, so it's especially sensitive uh, to uh, deciding that it's going to make a 1 inch head. And there's no market for 1 inch heads, obviously. That's the buttoning situation. Um, and that's the plant is thinking that maybe it should start flowering. The transplant shock comes along and it says, oops, things are bad. I better flower now. You don't want that to happen. The smaller the transplant, the less likely that is to happen. Um, I ended up using 128 plugs, which is probably on the high end, but that was to reduce some other risks. Commercially, we saw 200s being very common. People using the plant tape technology are up to like 800, enormous numbers. So it depends on your system for transplanting a lot. Weed control, setting the transplants, irrigation, lots and lots of factors come into how small a transplant you can use. Um,
Here's a question
yeah.
on the chat. Is 3.5 inch okay from the top of the tree?
Uh, yes, I'd say if it's so I think of it more of the size of the plug. You grow them until they're almost root bound when they come out of the plug easily. So that's why the plant size and the plug size are very closely correlated. Once they get root bound, they stop growing. So you have to, once you get there, you have to do something with them. Um, but I think at 200, we'll get to about 2.5 inches.
Oh.
Sorry, 3.5 inches, like you said.
Thomas, in the chat box, there's a comment. It's a long one. I can't read it. Ask your opinions. So it said, we have learned a lot in the past 5 years, becoming aware of the vegetative versus regenerative aspect of plaque production. If stressed and a plaque switch from vegetative to regenerative, problems you cannot make it go back to
No,
vegetative when this occurs. We now plant our very first early spring broccoli on black plastic because it keeps the roots warmer and avoid sudden switch to regenerative and flowering too early. Does this conclusion make sense to you?
Yeah. No, that's again, sort of the dragster phenomenon. Once it's changed to gear, it's not going back. It wants to go full speed in the other direction. And so giving it the conditions that will allow it to do that uh, is right. And again, broccoli switches over to potentially reproductive fairly early. So about the fifth true leaf, even for late varieties, you're starting to be at some risk for that.
Mm. And Thomas, if you're thinking about using very small transplants, and if you plant it in the spring and you have very cold days, would those plants be more vulnerable to very low temperatures?
They should, that would be in the hardening off. So when it's cool, you have a little more latitude in hardening off. Um,
Mm,
um, and so that allows them to develop the cold tolerance that they need.
okay. Yeah,
But
thanks.
that has so much to do, what's the condition of the soil when you're setting, um,
Mm,
and what
right.
tools are you using for that? So that's why I say in your system, all the parts of the system play a role: temperature, soil, uh, the people's ability to handle things.
Yeah, makes sense.
So now we're in second gear. So this was a trial we did uh, trying to look at what kind of yields could we potentially have um, if we really gave broccoli good conditions. And so what's a reasonable population to use? So we did this where the wheel spacing is 60 inches, which is what we're set up to do. With cabbage, we do 1 row, but with broccoli, we did 3 rows, 15-inch between the rows. And the in-row spacing here is 6, 8, and 12 inches. So it's uh, actually pretty simple dimensions to get these populations. One thing that you can see in the left picture is that whoever was setting the left row did a much better job than the person who was setting the right row. So this is 16 days after transplanting. We're starting to get filled in. So there's no weeds yet. Our original herbicide application has held, and these are about to close the canopy. So we've more or less solved our weed problem in the high population one. Sorry. There. Yeah, so there's room in the other one for weeds in between the plants still, but less so in the high populations. Um, so this is 22 days, so about a week later. This is when the crop really needs a lot of nitrogen. And so uh, basically you want it to grow really fast now. As soon as it starts to be producing the head, it should slow down a little bit. And you can really control the rate of growth is temperature, which you don't have any control over, but you know what it is. The amount of nitrogen it has available. So in this case, we are using drip fertigation, so we have fairly high control over that. It's a silt loam soil, so it holds lots of nutrients, so that it's buffered to some extent, and will supply nitrogen on its own. So we can't cut off the nitrogen by withholding it, but we can add. And then water, very responsive to water as well. We get plenty of rain, but we can supplement with irrigation. If it grows too fast, you get hollow stem. So that's sort of the engine blowing up, if you will, that it grew too fast. But here, 33 days complete canopy cover, 41 days really packed in with the leaves. So this is not a lot of days apart that this is happening. There's a weed sticking out in the low population, so you can see that they're spaced far enough apart that not quite getting the weed suppression of the others. And at 52 days, there are a few heads in the low population here. There's a little one poking up there, and another one here. They're about 1 inch across. And then down here, that one's about 2 inches. You also see some of the lower leaves are yellow. That's because they're in the shade, so they're not doing much good. The plant knows that it is moving the nitrogen out of those leaves up into the head. That's good. So that is not a sign of nitrogen deficiency. It is a sign that it's time to reallocate resources. The yellow really jumps out when you're looking at the field, but at this stage, we're just a few days from harvest in the lowest population one. So then comes the harvest. So we've found that a lot of growers were trying for 3 cuts to get all of the heads. They don't all mature at the same time, and each head only stays at the ideal harvest maturity for a day or two in the summertime. So you really have a challenge trying to optimize that. And in this one, we found that the higher the population, the later the harvest. We found we could bump the population from the 26,000 to 39,000. We did get a few more heads. So we got a higher yield out of those. I would say that a lot of growers are finding that the economic optimum is turning out to be a lower number than 650, maybe 450 or 500, just because logistically it's easier to get things done. But it shows that we can get higher numbers in New York. I don't know what is a reasonable number for the soils and conditions in Indiana.
That's interesting. Look at the population, but we do have a comments asking. We have seen the European style 26,000
Yes.
per acre, 24 in single nut helps even maturity. I think your data explains that.
Mm-hmm.
So the comments.
Yes. Once you get up to the higher population, quite a few of the plants just end up being runts. They get shaded out. And so then they behave like weeds and they make the neighboring plants a little bit smaller than they would have been otherwise. So that's not good. So here's, in terms of controlling plant size. So population is the other thing besides water and nitrogen that you have as your management tools. And so here you see the effect of the 3 populations. These are just different plots. Each of the populations. And we're trying to get about 0.22, 0.23, kilos. So right in here is kind of our target size. So we are running a little bit small. The variety was Lieutenant, which was popular when we did this experiment and is obsolete now. But you can see that that's a very tight relationship between the size of the head and the incidence of hollow stem, which we don't want. So this relationship will be different for each variety. Um, and for whatever variety you have, you want to find this happy point where the head is as big as you can get it without getting hollow stem. Uh, and so usually what happens is that people are finding hollow stem with a particular variety in a particular field. And so what can you do to make that not happen again? And it can be to have the nitrogen run out a little bit sooner in the growing cycle, um, apply less irrigation later, not zero, but back off on that so the plant growth slows a little bit, um, or to tighten up the population, obviously for subsequent plantings. But those are the tools that you have to manage hollow stem in the varieties that are susceptible to it. So thinking about the tools for production, so water, heat, nitrogen, and population. Um, and there is a lot of nitrogen in the system because you're harvesting um, at the fastest growing part or just after the fastest growing part of the season when you want lots of available soil nitrogen. You've got all these bright green succulent leaves just full of protein, lots of nitrogen there. There's hundreds of pounds of nitrogen in the field after harvest. So think about what's going to happen to that nitrogen. Try to save it in the system for the upcoming crops that you're going to put in. I can give a talk on cover crops to discuss that, but that's a different topic. Um, then harvest, really big cost, can be 60% of your production cost, but I'm not going to talk about that. Um, uh, People figure out how to do that in different ways. But I'm going to go third year post-harvest. So because broccoli is respiring so quickly, it's all meristematic tissue or flower buds, uh, it generates a lot of heat uh, and it responds a lot to temperature. So getting it cold quickly is very important. And because of the high base respiration rate, cold means 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius. It doesn't mean 40 degrees like a refrigerator. It doesn't even mean 34 degrees. It means 32 degrees. And the way you mostly get exactly that temperature is by having an ice water slurry that will stay right at 32. Um, you don't want an ice brine slurry that is, say, 30 degrees because the cut end of the broccoli will freeze and then you lose your crop. So it's a very, very narrow window of temperature there. Um, and so what we have here are some curves on how much respiration is going on and how big the effect of the temperature at harvest is. Uh, so the red curve and the axis on the left are self-heating. So this is how much the temperature of the broccoli will go up if it just sits there in the boxes on the pallet after harvest. So if you're in northern Maine and it's October and it's 35 degrees and you're harvesting, it's cold, no problem, not going to heat. But if you're in Indiana in the summertime in the morning and it's in the 60s, then you're looking at 5-degree temperature increase in the first hour after harvest. Typically takes somewhere around that amount of time to get it in to where you can cool it. If it's just a little bit warmer, say later in the day in 75, now you're looking at 10 degrees. So then it's going to be 85 by the time you get to the packing shed. So how much heat is that producing? Well, let's have a look. 85 degrees, we'll look at the right-hand curve. That's producing about 10,000 BTUs per hour per ton of broccoli. That's a lot of heat. And then if you leave it for a second hour after it's at 85, it's going to heat up another 20 degrees, and it's 100 and some degrees, probably smelling pretty ripe by then. Not good. So getting it cool fast, harvesting when it's cool, getting it in the shade, getting it in the packing shed where you can cool it quickly is really, really important for summer production. And how much refrigeration is it going to take to cool it down? So this is on the left is the temperature when it arrives at the packing shed. And this is assuming that you're trying to cool it with current refrigeration and you have 2 tons of refrigeration capacity for every ton of broccoli. So if you get it in at 70, it cools off reasonably quickly over a few hours. If you bring it in at 80, it doesn't cool down quite as fast because it's generating more heat, but you can still pull that temperature down. Uh, at 90, it starts to get a little bit dicier, uh, not really getting it down to reasonable temperatures over the first several hours. But if it's even a little bit warmer, 95 degrees, that 2 tons of refrigeration is not enough to counteract the heat that the broccoli is producing. It's not going to cool down, even though you have that refrigeration going at full capacity. So super important to get it cool quickly, not letting it heat up. You lose a tremendous amount of quality and shelf life by letting it heat up as well. Um, so how do you get it cool? There's a bunch of different techniques. Um, our economics team looked at what it cost per box to get things cold at different scales. And the prices were surprisingly close. But one approach is hydrocooling, where you have um, an ice water mixture and have either just the water or the ice and water together um, going into the boxes. You can have liquid ice injection. So this is a water ice slurry that leaves a bunch of ice in the box. Um, Very small scale, cold tap water doesn't get it cold enough for most of the time, but for very small scale, uh, at least getting the field heat out of it with tap water uh, can be fairly inexpensive. Um, the most expensive by far is what a lot of small growers did is you basically buy a big box of ice or a bunch of bags of ice, and then you break the bags open or shovel the ice into your boxes. Um, it's slow cooling because there's no water there to exchange heat, uh, and it's super expensive. Um, and then the clamshell liquid ice injection pallet scale uh, ended up being surprisingly expensive. But that so the you can move a lot of broccoli that way, but it's not necessarily cheaper. And that's what the your competitors with the biggest production are using that. Um, so we published an extension bulletin, cooling methods for broccoli, um, and I've managed to cut off the DOI, but that's available free online. You can print it out. Um, so I'll have to provide you with a link later. I thought I had one on here. Um, but that ends up having a lot of useful information about post-harvest handling uh, that's suitable for the East. A lot of the material for the West is designed for very, very large growers. Um, I visited Salinas and you know, the folks at Dole or Ocean Mist, they can go down the block to Ice Incorporated and buy unlimited amounts of ice. So we don't have that kind of infrastructure at all. So the assumptions are totally different. Um, but here's your ice water slurry going into some black. Uh, these are the plastic returnable boxes that they're using. So they're well suited. You can see that that ice water slurry is coming in with a lot of force, really gets ice mixed in everywhere in the box, even the broccoli at the bottom gets there. And they continue on down the line here as they drain the water out. And then left with just the ice. It still takes quite a bit of time for the center of the broccoli to get cold, but it uh, stops the heating in a hurry. I think this makes sense for a lot of medium scale growers. Moving the individual boxes is kind of a high labor aspect of it. This is a low cost one, but if you're harvesting cold, it works. So this is just a cold room with not even huge amount of refrigeration on the walls. But this is a mist nozzle, and so they're spraying a mist of water in there. The water evaporates, so they maintain high humidity, but the evaporation of the water provides additional cooling. So they're actually bringing it down, temperature down below what the refrigeration does by itself. So if you have cold broccoli, it'll stay cold this way. You're not going to pull field heat out of it with this kind of a cooling system. But very inexpensive, especially if you have the cold room already. And this is a clamshell machine. So you put a stack of 2 pallets in this one, and it injects ice into the whole shebang. This setup with the refrigeration and ice and all the other handling food grade is close to $500,000. So it's a very significant investment. So does it make sense to do that for just your broccoli? You'd have to have a lot of broccoli for that to work, but you can also move a lot of broccoli through. So I think this is going to be the high volume choice for a lot of people. So that's the end of the post-harvest. So I'll just kind of check back with some of the thoughts I had on what makes sense for broccoli production in Indiana. So the low risk window is really a short window in the fall. If you're trying to harvest at other times, you are doing something that is quite difficult. And so it'll take a lot of figuring out how to manage the risks of particularly high temperature during those seasons. However, new varieties are coming available that are reducing the risk in that window. So there is definitely reason to try. There are future varieties that are coming out that are in the pipeline with the seed companies that they will help as well. I think starting small, because the growing part is actually the easier part of it. The selling, relationship management, those are difficult parts, and sending a tractor trailer load of broccoli that gets rejected is really expensive. So you don't want to end up with that expense. Your competition price-wise is in California and in Mexico. They are very, very efficient. So you have to be efficient too in how you do production and post-harvest. But if you can identify a market that has a price that makes sense and volume that makes sense for your farm, broccoli can be quite lucrative. A lot of markets, they have to always have broccoli. Not necessarily luxury broccoli, or we haven't found a market for that. But by and large, people like broccoli. They want to have it in stock. If you can get a good relationship, you can do well with it. And we have a website, easternbroccoli.org, and that has a lot of the information that I've talked about today. And so anyway, thanks so much for having me, and I'm happy to deal with any other questions you might have.
Questions you immediately want to follow that. You mentioned about the full harvest window. Then how that broccoli respond to frost, like on the cold side.
Yeah. So broccoli will tolerate light frosts. That's okay. It let's see, about 27, 28 degrees will make it be pretty limp in the morning, assuming that it thaws out in the morning. Um, but it can perk up in the afternoon and be okay. Um, so you wouldn't want to leave it for very long, but you could harvest it after an episode like that. Um, uh, yeah, so the high risk, uh, if you have as is typical, it looks like several weeks of great harvest weather coming up after a 27-degree night. Uh, that's what fall is like in the East anyway. Uh, uh, Maybe you can not consider that to be too high a risk, that the opportunity to harvest afterwards is is worth taking that risk.
Thanks. We have two questions back to the marketing side.
Uh-huh.
Charlie's asking the sprouting broccoli. Some growers think it's easier to grow a quality product. How was that?
Yes.
How the East side growers
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. So the sprouting broccoli or broccolini is market-wise, that's a different product, different SKU. Uh, and so there are a lot of varieties there that will have more heat tolerance. Um, in fact, there's some, if you get into sort of broccolini, broccoli rabe, Guan territory, there's stuff that isn't even entirely broccoli that looks similar. So there's a lot more choices. They tend to have larger flower buds on them, which makes them more naturally tolerant because they don't want to slow down the flower growth as much as the fine beaded broccolis.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Uh, the reason that you don't see more of it grown is that it is hugely expensive to harvest. Um, I've timed uh, experienced broccoli pickers, and they cut about a head every 3 seconds for hours on end. It's amazing. Um, but if you have broccolini that you're harvesting at the same pace, you're not filling a box fast enough. So uh, that makes it a challenge. There are a couple of broccoli varieties. Mont Fleur from Syngenta is one um, that are designed to make the broccolini type stems um, in a regular broccoli head. They just extend those stems late in production, and you can come and cut off a dozen or so of the mini broccolis at the same time. Um, but that is a regular broccoli. It doesn't have any particular extra heat tolerance.
And Charlie's also wondering about the cauliflowers. Can you say a little bit about that? Do you see some potential here?
Yeah, cauliflower is so I surprised you may be surprised. I don't have a lot of experience with cauliflower. It's a pretty tricky one to grow as well. Uh, I think new varieties have come on there um, that stay white and are self-wrapping that have really changed cauliflower production quite a bit. Um, but that's also one where you're harvesting generally when it's cool. You don't have the heat tolerance issue at all, so that can open up a window. Um, and uh, there, I don't know if there's opportunity for growing some of the heat tolerant cauliflowers out of India. They have a different structure, so they would go exclusively to Asian markets. Um, we tried growing uh, broccoli from very hot places like Taiwan and Thailand and India. Uh, in the southeastern United States, you looked similar kinds of temperatures and humidity. They didn't work at all. They just fell apart. So uh, whatever's going on in those climates is different. So you definitely would have to check it out with the high temperature cauliflowers, but they might work.
So interesting. And Lisa is asking, can you speak on black rot disease in broccoli?
Yeah, it's bad. And so most of the major seed companies are testing for black rot. I think the standard at least 2 or 3 of them that I've talked to is that for each seed lot, they grow out 50,000 seeds in the greenhouse and check for the presence of black rot, and they only sell clean seed. So that's a way to keep it out of the plantings to begin with. But just keeping the rotations is the primary way to prevent black rot in the production fields.
Is any varieties have a difference on the tolerance resistance on this disease, or they are pretty much the same?
That I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So and there's a Ben is asking the cat eye. Other than indicating heat stress in the field, does cat eye result in a different shelf life or flavor? Do you know that?
Yeah, so cat eye, so there's a lot of different things that end up being called cat eye. So the one I most commonly encounter is that the flower bud opens a little bit, and the stigma shows, and sometimes a little bit of the yellow flower petals from the inside. So that doesn't affect the flavor at all. It does look a little bit funny, so a lot of customers will not accept that. I don't know whether it affects the shelf life. If you keep them cold, they're not going to continue developing very much. But because these have started to develop to the next growth stage already, that means that you're at more risk for them having to continue down that path and looking worse and worse. So that would definitely cut down on your shelf life.
Okay. Next question is about boron. Is boron also cause hollow stem?
Boron, yeah, boron can also cause hollow stem. It's not that common to run into boron deficiency around here, but if you're in a location where that happens, it's relatively straightforward to get 1/2 pound of boron per acre added to your fertilizer. And that will prevent boron deficiency and hollow stem induced by boron deficiency. You can easily see the difference because when they're growing too fast, it just creates an airspace. When it's boron deficiency, it's killing cells and they turn black. So if you're looking at a hollow stem, if it's light green, looking just like the rest of the pith tissue, it just grew too fast. If it's black, boron deficiency.
Since we are talking about the nutrient, I have a follow-up question. Thomas, you mentioned the too much nitrogen, they get them moved too fast. Do you have like a rough? I know nitrogen is a difficult question. What's recommendation on the fertilizers? But what if growers typically apply in your region?
For people who are shooting for about 500 boxes an acre, we see application rates between 150 and 200 pounds per acre. I think 200 is more than the recommendation, but I'd say that would be the range. If you're going for lower yields or you have smaller, shorter plants or what have you, then lower yields. But for something that's in the ground for 55 days, 200 pounds is a lot.
Yeah.
That's why I say it's a very high nitrogen crop. It uses a lot. It contains a lot in the residue at the end. It's not happy about being short of nitrogen at all. So nitrogen management is a really big deal.
Is the growers in this region split apply nitrogen or just a one-time application?
People vary in how they do that. It's helpful to do a later application to get the timing right, where we have as much rainfall as we have. If you're putting on a soluble fertilizer at transplant, you've got 2 or 3 weeks where it doesn't really need very much, and it can rain and wash it away. So that's a real worry. So if you can come in after almost 3 weeks and put the rest on then, that's super helpful. The plant is in perfect condition to take it up. The ground's protected from rain to some extent. The plants are able to transpire a lot more and take up any nitrogen, take up the water if it does rain. After that, there's probably not room. So that's they've closed the canopy by then, and you're not going to be running any fertilizer equipment through that field.
Yep. Okay. Is there other questions? So Charlie put a bird star did well for us in our black rod files. It's a resources here. Thomas, I do want to ask if you could share with us the fungicide, insecticide, herbicide. If Cornell have resources, I think it will be great to share with our growers.
Well, I would actually recommend the Midwest Production Guide for all of the pesticide things. Each state is different, so even if I knew them, it would be going out on a limb to give out-of-state recommendations on the pesticides. But Cornell is trying to figure out how to get the Cornell Recommends published in a better way, and I'm telling them, look at what the Midwest is doing. This really seems to be working. It's an excellent product. People are working really well together. So
I'm sure Ben will be happy to hear that. He's here. Okay. That's so nice, and I really did not realize the post-harvest is that so critical for the broccolis. Yeah. Any other questions from our audience here?
No, so yeah, I see lots of comments here. Good. And
Yep. Yeah, and there's a comment about AI spot sprayer trial.
yeah.
Yep. That's
well, AI is coming to broccoli production. There's no question. So we don't know all the ways it will happen. And yeah, and like I said, I skipped all over harvest, but figuring out which heads to pick when you're doing a non-destructive repeat harvest. There's lots happening in that area.
Mechanical harvesting goes to broccoli.
We're calling it robotic because it's a multiple harvest. Mechanical harvests,
okay, I got it.
It tends to imply a once-over harvest. And because not enough of the crop is ready at the same time, that only works for the last pass through when there's getting the runt heads that came later. But so the robotic vision guided harvest is where the action seems to be. So I don't know if he's Eric Schuler I see made a comment here, but is one source of information for that sort of thing.
Okay, and if we don't have more questions, I think we'll call this the end. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks. Good luck.
A lot of great informations. We really appreciate.
You bet. All righty.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for participate, everyone.